is watching. The Illuminati are planning to take over the world. The species have arrived. Grab your hats. This is tinfoil hat time.
Welcome back to Switch to Linux. Today we're going to be talking about Apple's own little iSheep. So, Apple's been in the news a couple times this week. Some supposed product leaks, which were probably may or may not have been true. But the biggest issue is the one of the controversies, which if you've not seen it and don't know which controversy I'm talking about, we're going to get into that in a bit here. But first, I'm going to highlight some of the issues. Now, I was looking for a whole bunch of Mac issues. Louis Rossmann did an excellent video. I forgot to find it, and I'm going to try and put it down in the description there. And he did an excellent thing, literally walking you through a lot of the hardware issues that Apple's had throughout the years. I found a fun little article on specifically the iPhone issues, so we're going to go ahead and have a look at that. So, in this one here, the nine biggest controversies in iPhone history, and some of these are kind of non-issues. I'm just going to skip right by them, like iPhone price cut penalizes early buyers. All right, this happens in any emerging industry. Don't dive onto an emerging industry too soon, because you'll end up paying twice as much as anyone else. Sit back. Make sure that the people who buy it, one leg doesn't shrink or something, or, they don't fall over dead from excess radiation, etc., etc., etc. That's just all I'm going to say about that. I'm not going to sit here and say that's an iPhone controversy. I just think that happens in any emergent market, so not working. No flash support blocks content. This is an interesting one, which I fully supported their idea. I think Apple was ahead of the curve on this. Even Adobe's calling for the death of Flash, and they own it. But it's probably still not going to happen right away, immediately yet, because Flash stores, Flash cookies, is what causes zombie cookies, and advertisers like them. I think that now that GDPR is in full swing, I'm probably going to expect this Flash to completely die very soon. So iOS 6 Maps goes off the track. Yes, iOS Maps is the only map function you could literally be driving through New York, look down at your map, look back up, and actually find yourself in the Australian outback. It produces, just using a phone with iMaps on it, just causes wormholes to open up, and you just drive right through a red light, miss a street, through the side of a building, and end up in the Australian outback because of the number of people that got lost and stranded in the Australian outback following Apple Maps. And this is literally a picture of it. So apparently the Brooklyn Bridge collapsed that day. Okay. Early versions of Apple Map. Yeah. And I remember this is the first experience I had with Apple was iOS 6. And they took the maps and I'm like, that's interesting. Antenna gate. This was a fascinating one. There were actually two major issues with the iPhone 4. One of those is the antenna gate. If you had your plain iPhone, and this one's not the 4, but it's pretty close to the same design. So you had here the iPhone. In fact, it's pretty much the same overall thing. This is the SE. And with the SE or the iPhone 4, if you would take the thing and hold it, it would literally, putting your finger down here like this would actually kill the signal. And they'd be like, you're holding it wrong. And it became a meme, you're holding it wrong. You gotta, hold it like this, I guess. Take your several $100 phone and hold it just right, Now, I never experienced that because I think if you have a $600 iPhone and you're not putting it in a very good protected case, you need to have your head examined. Which is why I think it's hilarious. It's like, look at our beautiful, our sleek, our sexy iPhones. And then you're not putting it in a case. Like, dude, I don't care what the back of the phone looks like. It's going to be in a very rigid case. Because I don't have hundreds of dollars to be rolling around. And I'm not going to be whopping over another couple $100 because Apple says, pay me, iSheep. And that's kind of the thing. So this one never bothered me. The other one was the power button apparently died on these pretty well. I didn't actually have that problem either with mine. So my iPhone 4 treated me well. But this was a legitimate problem. If I didn't have a case on my iPhone, I probably would have experienced antenna gate. And I had just come off of Android, I would have said, what is this stupid thing? It doesn't even work as a phone. Let's take this thing back and get another one. But I didn't have that because, I put cases on my phone. Believe it or not, I actually put cases on my phones. So that was another one of them. And then poor labor conditions in China. This is one of the things that our article we're going to look at here later covered. And there is a lot of this. In fact, the labor is so bad, they have to put up suicide nets to prevent their employees from jumping off the rails. And so that is certainly a legitimate concern. They don't pay people well. They've been known to screw their manufacturers, things like that. And that's what gives rise to these aftermarket parts that people are trying to buy, and then Apple's, utilizing the government offices like their own personal Gestapo, and you're counterfeiting stuff, and this is illegal. And it's like, and Louis Rossman has a lot of videos on that. All right, lost iPhone. Ooh, somebody accidentally leaked a phone. We don't care. The unwanted YouTube album. Oh, this pissed me off. I'm very particular about how my music is set up and things like that. I have a very detailed library, which is my music, my Christian sermons, all this kind of stuff. Very well organized, very neatly cataloged, exactly the way I like it. So I look down at my iPhone. A U2 album? Can't delete it? Oh, that caused some problems. This is one of their biggest backlashes. Like, what? You don't want the free music? No, Apple! I don't want your free, stupid... The most hilarious meme about this I've ever seen is YouTube released a new album, the most undownloaded album in history, and it probably I don't even really want to go off anymore on that about that. Looks like some of my hats kind of needing some adjustments there. All right. So of course they ended up putting a forum post up. So you had a tool. You literally had to download a tool from Apple to remove the unwanted, unrequested music album from your phone. Yep. The iOS 8 brick phones. Yes, if you had replaced any part on your phone with iOS 8 had a brick, couldn't even get your data off of it. It was just an encrypted brick. They're like, oh, buy a new phone, derp. And that was kind of what Apple's option was. And this caused a huge problem because, you had a screen break. Apple's like, we can't replace that screen, so you go to some other place, get another screen, put it in there, it works perfectly fine. You update the phone, it's been working perfectly fine, you have no reason not to necessarily update, and then you have a brick. Moral of the story, people, A, don't back up all your stuff in Apple's ecosystem. We're going to be talking about this later. But B, always make backups of things before you push it. I mean, if you had made an appropriate backup, like the warning screen tells you to, prior to pushing that update button, then the person could have bought another iPhone because they're a sheep. More phones, more phones. They get you that, and then what happens is they would be able to plug that back in, restore at least all of their personal data. So this was a certain issue. But the thing is that not everybody backs up because the thing just starts annoying you at the most inopportune times. It's like, okay, whatever, backup, install update. It's like, fine, whatever, you install the update, you don't even think about the backup. And that's maybe a problem. This one here was just earlier this year. Apple admits to slowing down old phones. Some people had done some tests. Apple's like, no, it's your imagination because our phones, our new market, it's so good. It just feels like your phone's there. And so you should the best thing to do is just get rid of your old phone that's only a year old and buy a brand new one. Fork out that money, you Apple sheep. New phone. Because of all this, well, it turns out that all it was is that the phone was slowing the thing down if it was older, because it's like, well, the battery may not be as efficient. Replacing the battery solved the problem, so they dropped their price. And this was the one we're going to talk about. one that wasn't a controversy. Bendgate. Barely a week after the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus debuted in record sales, reports started emerging online about the large 6 Plus was subject to a defect in which a housing bent severely in a way that couldn't be repaired. Antennagate was mentioned, and observers speculated that Apple had another major manufacturing problems. Bendgate. Enter Consumer Reports. Remember Consumer Reports, the people that are actually paid by Apple? If you want evidence of this, they gave a very poor review of the MacBook, and then shockingly, just a couple days later, they reversed their entire review and it's like, we highly recommend this one. Yeah, it was the latest MacBook MacBook Pro, the computer that pretty much wasn't a pro machine. Like, you can't have a pro machine with no usable ports for pro people. Well, when Consumer Reports originally released their report, you might have to hunt for this in the Internet Archives, it was actually a negative report. Week later, somehow, they just, we made a mistake, and glowing reports. So I'm not sure I trust Consumer Reports when it comes to Apple. They seem to have a little agenda, and it might have a couple dollar signs in the mix. So enter Consumer Reports, the organization whose testing helped confirm Antennagate was real. Of course, let's set their credibility. Consumer Reports performed a series of stress tests on the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus and found that claims the phone could be easily bent were unfounded. Any phone can be bent, of course, but the iPhone 6 requires a lot of force before any problems occur. So it's worth remembering, Apple's a big target and people can make a name for themselves by attacking it. That's really my objective. Clickbait, man, all the way. But that doesn't make their claims true. It's always smart to be skeptical. Yeah, I'm very skeptical. I'm skeptical that Apple has their customers' best in mind, because it turns out that there's a class action lawsuit going on about this Bendgate going on, and it turns out that because, under a compelled court order, Apple had to give internal documents, and the judges reading these over and found this very fascinating part. Moreover, Apple's internal testing determined the iPhone 6 was 3.3 times more likely to bend than the iPhone 5S, the model immediately prior to subjective phones, and the iPhone 6 Plus was 7.2 times more likely to bend than the iPhone. Underscoring the point that the major concerns Apple identified prior to launching the iPhones as they were, quote, more likely to bend more easily when compared to previous generations. So according to Apple internal documents that are still sealed but released by the judge, yes, the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus bent a whole lot easier than other models did. That's number one. And number two, they knew about this prior to launch. And number three, they intentionally kept that information back, even blaming their users for this, charging people hundreds of dollars for a known manufacturing defect. This is not going to turn well in Apple's favor, but they've got billions, so this isn't going to really hurt them. Each person in the class action lawsuit who had to pay hundreds of dollars to get this is probably going to get their good old, quarter. There you go. Here's your quarter. Thank you. And then the lawyers are going to run off with $1 million. And that's kind of the way that that's going to play out. But the take-home message is that Apple openly, completely, thoroughly, and unashamedly and repeatedly lied about a known manufacturer's defect. They lied about it. They knew about it. They didn't care. They wanted to blame their customers. Now it's coming out because it's compelled to come out, released by a judge as part of discovery in an ongoing lawsuit. How many other things is Apple lying to you about? And that's really the question. And so I did a little bit of researching and finding things, and I found this fascinating peer-reviewed article from the Accounting Forum, December of 2013. So it's a couple of years old, but it's a fascinating read. You can actually come over here to Science Direct and download the actual article. And I have the article here, and I actually wrote my notes directly on the paper, so I'm going to set the keyboard aside a little bit. This is the article. We're going to leave that over here. Actually, we're going to come back to our main screen. We're just going to go ahead and chat about some of the things in the article here. So the article, of course, is entitled Owning the Consumer, Getting to the Core of Apple's Business Model. Actually, we're going to go back to the other article. I'm going to highlight a few things here. All right, so what they're going to do is they're going to highlight the post-2003 business model. And they picked the 2003 business model. They say that this is right about the time that Apple really started to take off. And it's tied, now these guys tie it probably slightly earlier than I would tie it. They tie it to the launch of the iTunes, the iTunes store, iTunes Music Store. I think it really probably more took off with the growth of the iPhones and iPads, but they have a good compelling argument for picking that date. Now, they look at the return of Steve Jobs, and then they think that up until the 2003, they ran a different business model. But after 2003, they ran a completely different business model. So they're going to be evaluating Apple's post-2003 business model. They're going to be looking at Apple's physical supply chain, demonstrating the shortcomings of the business model. And they're going to look at their content supply chain, which is their DRM-laden music, apps, video, things like that. They're going to look at how Apple exerts control over retailers and, they don't mention it here, but retailers and producers. And then they're going to be looking at Apple's multi-channel platform and how it allows them to own the consumer. So keep that in mind. You are owned. You are owned by Apple. I'm actually going to see if I can't find the highlights in here so I can highlight them down here, corresponding to what I'm working on here. All right. So some of the things that I highlighted here are from this paragraph here. They argue that the quintessential element of Apple's business model is its ability to own the consumer. In short, the Apple business model is designed to drive consumers into an ecosystem and hold them there, which has been hugely successful to date and allowed Apple to wield enormous power in the end-to-end supply chain. Now, this is where I give the warning, do not allow yourself to be pulled into the ecosystem. Don't be having a credit card on file with Apple. They don't need it. Okay, don't be buying up a bunch of apps, and certainly don't be buying up a lot of DRM-laden stuff in your Apple device, because what it does is the more stuff you buy, the more it ties you into the ecosystem. It's better if you want to get out, you're like, okay, we're going to stop the faucet now. I got 15 movies in there. If I buy another 15, I have less incentive to leave the ecosystem. It's exactly what they're trying to do, okay? They say a little bit further down here in this sentence, it starts with, we argue, okay? Apple's business model is ensuring that Apple content can only be played on Apple devices, and this helps maintain digital download market and share, and in turn drives sales volume for profitable hardware devices. Apple maintains its multi-channel platform integration through legal, ICE, technological means, and extends its mantra of control past the multi-platform to all partners in the supply chain, including suppliers and manufacturers. All right. And then in the finally part, I didn't highlight anything from the third, from the finally part, about halfway through. For instance, supply chain, let's see. Okay, the supply chain bring with them new problems that Apple has thus far been unable or unwilling to address. For instance, Apple clings to an outdated, efficiency-based supply chain, putting it in the firing range of human rights groups. And I think that the only reason human rights groups have not successfully killed Apple at this point in time is because they're too busy on their iPhones. Like, oh boy, if we kill the Apple stuff, then where will we go and get our hipster overpriced products? And so that's kind of where we're looking at here. Now they go into when the novelty wears off. There are many different explanations for Apple's recent success. Some regale the return of Steve Jobs as the decisive factor leading Apple out of the technological wilderness. Others focus on innovation, be it marketing or product design, software and content delivery, or good timing, and a hint of serendipity. finally, and I think this is the most important, finally, there are those that point to Apple's ability to extract extraordinary margins due to low-cost manufacturing strategy and an ability to maintain high price points by providing a unique retail experience. And so they go into a little bit later how that's going to play out a little bit there. All right, we're going to go down a few paragraphs. I think it's the bottom of this one, actually, starting with however. However, we argue that 2003 marks a decisive turning point in the business model through the integration of two technological platforms, the iPod and the iTunes Music Store. By controlling the interface between its hardware and its content, Apple was able to gain complete control over the multi-channel platform and realize the first opportunity to truly own the consumer. And that's really that core point, is each one of these companies, it's not just Apple. It is Apple, it is Google, it is Microsoft, it is Amazon, all wanting to own the consumer. They make reference down a little bit further to DRM. I think we want to, let me see if there's anything else from here real quick. Let's have a look at this here. This is, of course, their profits. Steve Jobs returns over here. And then we have the dot-com bubble. You can see where that's listed there. And then we have the launch of the iPod, the launch of the iTunes Music Store, and then it starts to grow. Now, what they didn't have in here is that iPhone really started right around here. No, when was iPhone? I think iPhone started right around here, I think. 2006 to 2008, I think. Somebody correct me on the exact date there. I think iPad first launched 2008-2009 period. Of course, this is the economic downturn, so pretty much everything fell in that little divot there right before it shoots up through the moon. That was the economic downturn in America. So they argue it was the advent of the iPod, the growth of the iPod. Now, understand this, that the iPod was significant because right around this time, MP3 players were first hitting their market. Prior to this, MP3s really didn't exist a whole lot. It took hours and hours to get your music CDs converted to one music CD converted to MP3s. It used to take us a long time. And then Audio Grabber comes out and you could rip a CD at like 10x speed. And it was like, whoa, I could get a whole 40-minute album in like 10 minutes. That's awesome, you know? And so you end up with the proliferation of these. And then Arcos and Creative came out with some of the first MP3 players, which is literally probably a Linux subsystem with a laptop hard drive, an LCD screen, and a headphone jack. And you could literally play your MP3s. And then the iPod comes out and has a way to lock people into an ecosystem. The Arcos and Creative ones, you plug those into your computer and it was just an external hard drive. You can drag and drop all your stuff. They were great. Apple required specialized software. And that was why it marked this, because they also had put together a good product that didn't break. I think Apple was one of the first to use a solid state system instead of a mechanical laptop hard drive, which meant things, you know, a mechanical laptop hard drive in a device meant to be carried around means that they broke a lot more. Apple did not have the mechanical hard drives, and that's one of the reasons they launched so well. And then enter the iTunes Music Store a couple years later. Now you have a way to sell music into there, and they were able to leverage this control to gain more control over all of the digital stuff. Now, part 3 down here, we're going to spend some more time on this one, and then I'm going to break off into some more commentary. So here under owning the consumer, starting with the second or third sentence down here, this business model relies on the integration of content, software, media, and apps, and hardware, laptop phones, and tablets to drive growth. According to Redder in 2009, Apple software may or may not be profitable, but the hardware is profitable. Therefore, a lack of interoperability is pivotal to Apple's business model. It helps maintain the digital download market share and delivers high margins by driving sales volumes for hardware devices. A couple paragraphs down. The business model allows Apple to, quote, own the consumer, end quote, which gives it an unparalleled power over its end-to-end supply chain. They talk about the procurement of music delivery, music, movies, and apps to the consumers, to their devices. They were able to port that over. And of course, non-Apple devices do not tie content to the device, allowing the consumers to own their content and switch devices without additional costs. By producing the devices and designing the software that connects it with all other platforms, Apple is able to control the digital marketplace and, by extension, the consumer. We're going to stop right there for some clarification. What they're talking about here is DRM, which they do use somewhere in this article. But they're talking about locking people in with DRM. Now, this is, like I said, this is not an issue exclusive to Apple. Amazon tries to do this a lot. Google and Microsoft, all of these companies are vying, and each one of them, if they can gain you as a captive person, they can effectively keep you there for life. Because if they can tie you into their system, whether it's Windows 10 or whether it's Apple, and then they tie you into the platform, and now you buy your music through them, you buy your music through them. So and like I said, all of the guys have this. Now it makes it very hard to leave, because if you leave the ecosystem, you have to leave behind all your purchases, because all that stuff you just bought, you didn't actually buy. That's the difference between DRM lock things and not DRM lock things. So I write books, all right? And my books, I have the digital copies are DRM free. Now, Amazon has, you may have seen the book sharing thing, where your book gets more highly promoted if you're in the book sharing thing. But what ends up happening is, to be in that book sharing program, you have to agree that you will only sell your ebook on Amazon, and you have to enable DRM protection on Amazon. So you have to enable those two things in order to do that. Well, those are two things I am not willing to give up the rights for my writing to lock somebody into an Amazon ecosystem and tie a person to buying my book, that if they decide Amazon has gone off the rails, they can't take my book with them and leave. That's why you can buy it from Amazon. It's listed. It should be DRM free if you get it from Amazon. I think one of the European companies locks my book with DRM, and I don't have any control over that. But if you're international and you want to buy my books, PayHip. That's where I allow international sales, because they handle that for me. I don't have to worry about it. If you're in the States, you can buy my books directly at the website, which is ourwalkinchrist.com. When you buy the ebook that I sell, or you can get on PayHip, it is a DRM-free copy. You can attach it to your iPhone if that's what you use. You can attach it to your Windows device or to your Kindle device if that's what you use, but you're not locked into any ecosystem. That's an acceptable risk for me. And yes, it's still illegal to distribute it. But what Apple has done is they were one of the first ones to figure out how to lock people into a walled garden, and that's exactly what they're doing. So I encourage you, don't do that. Buy DRM-free copies of your music, of your books, of everything you can. I have no problem with buying digital books, but I want to actually own the digital book. I want to be responsible. Just like if I go and I buy a book, we'll pretend this is a book. I go and I buy a book. I could lose the book if I'm careless with how I handle it or treat it, but I don't want to be forced to give up the thing that I bought, read, and enjoy if I decide I want to leave Amazon's platform, or Apple's platform in this case. So this is what their business model is, and this is why they own their consumers. All right. So typically, and then they get into the iSheep. Typically, consumers of Apple products are analyzed in terms of their brand loyalty and the power bestowed on Apple. By contrast, we isolate Apple's ability to control its consumers as a distinguishing factor in the business model. And so they go into a few examples of these. Now, the next section, they deal with how they can control their physical supply chain. There's some interesting things in there, but I don't want to really dive into all that. This is kind of how they can put tight controls on all of the things that you have. Basically, there is something I think I might want to read. Okay, so this is a commentary from Steve Jobs. Okay, so this is, let me find this if I can. There's a nice block quote here. All right. So a New York Times article, Duhigg and Bradshaw quoted an Apple executives explaining the advantage of producing in China. The executive cites the example of Steve Jobs insisting on fitting iPhones with scratch-resistant glass screens just a week before launch. New screens began arriving at the plant near midnight. A foreman immediately roused 8,000 workers from inside the company dormitories, and each employee was given a biscuit and a cup of tea, guided to a workstation, and within half an hour, started a 12-hour shift fitting glass screens into beveled frames. Within 96 hours, the plant was producing over 10,000 iPhones a day. So that's a quote from an Apple executive. The example makes it clear that Apple's business model relies on strict control over workers than low labor costs, which includes restrictions on their movements, leisure time, monetary penalties for missing productivity targets, and frequently delayed or failed payments of wages rife with the Chinese manufacturing control sector. Okay, openly endorsing the practices does place Apple at risk of the human rights groups, but they're just too hipster to set down their Apple products. They're like, these Apple products are bad. Oh, wait, hold on. I have these Apple products. Well, we'll just go ahead and forget about this group doing bad stuff to other people. You know, we'll go after the people beating up the cows, I guess. Then they talk about the content supply chain. First element of the content supply chain is the in-house production of the operating system and the software. So this is the only thing they're doing in-house. Okay, the iPod iTunes platform down here. iTunes iPod platform simply perfected integrated multi-channel platform by incorporating revenue stream from media content. This was initially accomplished through strict licensing agreements with major record labels like EMI, Sony, Universal to secure access to thousands of titles. Apple maintained control over key elements of iPod, particularly user interface and the interfaces between iPod, iTunes software, and other online iTunes music store. Then they restricted how the content was downloaded to DRM using from the iTunes Music Store by using their Fair Play digital rights management system. Down there. Which is managed as a company trade secret and made music only playable on the iPod. So Apple defends the integrated platform using extreme secrecy, refusing to open up digital rights management and others. And its corporate knowledge regarding product design and user interface. So by 2009, they'd captured 70% of the global market for legitimate digital downloads. The integration between content and hardware provides customers not only a seamless user experience from purchase to use, but also ensures that Apple captures the largest share of profits compared from the suppliers of actual content. And then they replicated this entire process with the App Store. So that is, let's see, I think there's another part on retailing them, but I think we're going to kind of wrap that kind of part up. So what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of end this with just a few key points here. The first is don't lock yourself into any ecosystem, Apple or Windows or Adobe or Amazon. It's okay to use those items. That's what I talked about at the beginning of this. It's okay to use those items. It's not okay if you allow the items to use you. If you become so integrated, reliant on their ecosystem, they have you locked. That walled garden, you scratch a little bit further into that ivy on that walled garden and you will find you are in a prison cell that you cannot leave without leaving everything that you have purchased behind. So do not buy your movies from Apple or from Microsoft or from Amazon in a digital format because you do not have the rights to carry those with you when you go somewhere else. You only buy things that are DRM free. You can manage them with an external library. I run a book server here. I buy DRM free copy ebooks. I prefer paper books to read it the first time. If it's a book worth having, I will buy a DRM copy. I will get rid of the paper copy. And then I manage a DRM-free library in my Office network that can be pushed to any device. Whether you use an iPhone, you can get DRM-free good e-readers that are not necessarily tied to Apple products. If you use an Android tablet or any other device, you have the ability to use these. Do this with music. Do this with movies. Do this with books. Do not lock yourself into any ecosystem, and Apple will not own you. Because if you get to the point where you're like me, after iOS 10, I was like, that's the last iPhone I'm getting. I'm done. I'm done with Apple. And, you know, I liked the Apple phone for a long time. I ran the Apple phone, I think, for about 5 years. I thought it was a superior model to Android. But unfortunately, they lost their way. They lost their way with hardware. They lost their way with software. And they clearly are more focused with the money. They want to lock people in. And as this article reports, they own their consumers. And they own their consumers because we as consumers allowed ourselves to be lured into the trap with some little candy, and then the walls were closed behind us. We are securely behind this little walled garden where everything looks, and we're too distracted about the walls around us. If you scratch through that ivy, you are in a prison. You are not in an ecosystem. And that's what I encourage you to get out of. Use systems that do not tie you down. Free and open source where possible. Get DRM-free copies of your digital media. There's no problem with digital media. You just don't want the digital media to be not owned by you. If you buy it, you should be able to have it, not lock it into DRM. So that's my thoughts on this. What are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comments down below. I hope you've enjoyed this video from Switched to Linux. If you'd like to help support the channel, check out the links at the top. There is another video over here. You can check out our Patreon page down here. And you can check out shop.switchtolinux.com for information on a t-shirt like this or some other designs. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.